What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. I am Eric. We are riding dirty. Today's episode, we're going to be taking these 130 millimeter RockShox Pike forks and we're going to make them 150 millimeters by swapping out an air spring. Stick around, I'm going to show you how to do it. All right, so in order to do this job, you need a couple things. There's a couple tools you're gonna need. You're gonna need some oil. You're also gonna need some grease. I'm gonna go over all the things you're gonna need right now to do this job from start to finish. First thing you're gonna need is a shock pump. You're also going to need some hex keys, a 5 millimeter along with a 2.5 millimeter and also another socket size 5 millimeter. You will need a rubber mallet. Next tool you will need is a torque wrench. We will also need a ratchet along with a socket big enough to hold this tool right here, which is a cassette tool. And it's also the same tool that you would use to take off the cap of the air side of your fork. We're going to be taking that off so we can put some oil in there. So we are going to need this as well. You will also need some snap ring pliers. It's also important to have some picks. Picks do a lot. They can get in those little tiny places. You will also need one of the most important things, a new air spring. This is a 150 millimeter air spring. This is the one that we'll be putting inside. Without this, we can do nothing. You will also need some suspension oil. This is the stuff that is backwards compatible with all of RockShox forks moving forward, anything that's 2019 and above. We'll also need one of these so you know exactly how many cc's to put inside. Also, don't forget grease. You're going to need grease to put on the air spring so that way you can make it lubricated. Okay, so step number one, we're going to take off this air cap right here and we're going to put the shock pump on there and we're going to let out all of the air so there is no air inside. Normally you would want to take whatever the amount of PSI is in there, what you normally run, but for us today, this is a brand new fork, so I have not set this fork up, so therefore I'm just gonna let the air out anyway. So we're gonna push the little button right here to let all the air out. At this point, what I like to do is I like to flip the fork upside down, and then I'm going to work on taking the bolts out, so I'll lower this, and just makes things a little bit easier so I can see them. Now that we have our fork upside down, we're going to be taking our 2.5 millimeter wrench and we're going to open this cap up right here, this little stopper. That way we can pull this off and get to the actual bolts that are underneath. You don't have to pull this bolt all the way out. You just have to do it enough to where you can get in there and pull this thing out. And we basically take that cap off so we can be exposed to this, so we can get our 5 millimeter hex key and undo this. So now all we want to do is loosen it until it breaks the seal. And that's broken now. And so according to RockShox, we're only going to do, from it being sealed, 3 turns out. 1, 2, 3. And that's so we can hammer on this with our rubber mallet to break the seal. All right, so next one, we're going to break the seal. Seal's broken. Now we're going to turn it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to grab our socket hex key, because this is what we're going to use to put on the back and then use the rubber mallet to hit it. So all we're doing is just going to tap on the back of this until it breaks it, and you'll feel it get free, and that's free. And what I like to do is unscrew it a little bit more and give it another tap to make sure it's completely free. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side, and we're just going to tap it. It's free. I'm going to do one more revolution, about 1.5, to make sure it's all the way out. And we're good. All right, so now that we've gotten these things loose, we're going to take them all the way out and put them off to the side. There's 1, there's 2. Don't forget the orientation of this. So your air side just has the black bolt, and your damper side has this where you put your rebound knob in. Now these lower legs should slide right off, and we're going to drain the oil out in a bucket I have below. Ugh, a little sticky to get those out. So now the oil is draining out of the bottom. There's not too much oil in there, to be honest, but there we go. We have the lower legs off. I'm surprised there's not a lot of oil in this. This is a brand new fork, and yeah. So Now we have the lower lays exposed, and that way we can take off this other air spring right now that's at 130. All right, our next step, we're gonna be taking out this snap ring that's right here. You want to be very careful with this because there's a lot of tension on this and it can fly off the snap ring pliers and potentially scratch your shaft right here. So you just want to be kind of careful as much as we can. So now we're getting that in there and we're going to pull it together and we're going to pull it out. Ooh. All right, so we got it out just a little bit. So now that we have it out just a little bit, we can probably pull this out with our pick tool right here. Yeah, see, that came right out. There we go. So now we're gonna take this off and put it off to the side for now because we will be reusing this again. One thing to remember, you'll notice on the snap ring that there's one side that's sharper. The sharper side right here, the edge goes on the outside. The smoother side goes on the inside. That's just the orientation. I try to remember to put things back exactly the way they were. So now that we have this thing ready to go, potentially we could just pull it out right now and it's ready to go. But one thing I've learned is that if you pull off the air cap on this side first, it's a lot easier to pull the spring out because it does have a little bit of suction in there. So it can be a little troublesome just to take a tish. So we want to go ahead and take this off so that way it's a little bit easier to pull the shaft out. So this is where our ratchet comes into place with our socket, and we're just going to go ahead and take this cassette tool and go in reverse and take this off. We'll say like you got to hold the fork in the right spot, otherwise it'll turn, but you just got to break it open a little bit and then we are good. And now that we're pulling this cap off, I'm curious to see how many volume spacers are already in here. Oh, so we have 2. Okay. I might add one more because I like adding more volume spacers. That way I can use less air and it ramps up a little bit better towards the end of the travel. And if you're ever wondering how to add volume spacers to your fork, the only thing you have to do is unscrew them from the cap themselves. Ooh, that one's really tight. Hold on. So I'm going to use my cassette tool right now. Go in there. Should be able to do this by my hand. Yeah, so there we got the volume spacers off. They actually screw into the bottom of your cap right here. So if you want to add them, take the cap off, screw them in, and these volume spacers screw together. So let me show you. So I want 3. I already had 2 inside. Now I'm going to add a third one. There's little tiny threads right here, and we're going to put them together just like this. And there we go. Now we have 3 volume spacers, and we're going to add this to this just by screwing it on. So when we go to put this back on, we'll be good to go. There we go. Simple, easy peasy. And now we're just going to pull this air shaft right out, or air spring. Ooh. And there we go. That is out. Simple as that. This is a 130 air spring. It's got grease all over it. We're going to be putting grease back onto this as well. And we're going to put a new one on. So at this point, this is where we're going to grab our grease and we're going to be putting it onto our air shaft right here on all the rubber seals, because that's what's going to help it have better friction when it's going up and down. So here's our new air spring. It is a 150 millimeter air spring. We're going to be putting grease all over the shaft right here, all over this spot right here. So that way it's just nice and lubricated. We're also going to be taking this down and throwing some grease all around here. Then we'll put it around these rings right here as well. We want this to be super lubricated because this is what's going to be moving up and down inside of our fork, and we do not want this to get hot and have too much friction on it. So that's what we're going to do. As much grease as we need to make this work well. We're going to pull this down. We're going to slap a little bit of grease right here in this little area. That way we can go all the way around, and then we can go up and down. So there's a nice amount of grease in there. All right, then we're going to pull this down, and then we're going to put a little bit right here. Same thing. We just want this to be well lubricated so it can do its job the way it's supposed to do its job. Okay, all the way down there. And I think we're doing pretty good. Now we're going to be putting this into the fork. All right, so we're going to be shoving this thing back in here. Just like this. You will need to apply just a little bit of pressure to get it in there. Same thing with getting this last part And this has always been like the most troublesome part I've noticed, but you just gotta shove it in and then you're good. Now we've got to put our snap ring back in. Before we push our snap ring back in, we got to put this down a little bit lower so it's past the point where the snap ring can go in. This is always kind of like a weird thing. What I'll do is use this rag and then use my hex key to kind of like push it in, our Allen wrench. So there. Now that it's seated a little bit better, we're going to throw our snap ring in. And you just want to be careful with this. I find that when you squeeze this together, if you push the thicker spot in first, it's a little bit easier. So if you just kind of go like this, and then you're good. And now that's seated in there and we are good to go. And it's the same orientation as when we pulled it out. Okay, so now we're going to flip this right side up and we're going to raise it. And we're gonna add our top cap, which has our volume spacers on there. So we're supposed to add about 3 milliliters of the fluid, which is the plush suspension fluid that we're gonna put in the top before we put our volume spacers and our cap back in. Now we're gonna flip this back upside down. We're gonna lower it because now we need to add our oil and our lower legs back to the fork. All right, so the first thing I like to do is get the legs on, get them nice and set on there. Sometimes they're a little tricky to get on there because you have to get both sides perfectly lined up. All right, we got one in. Now we gotta get the other one in. There we go. You just slide it down. So when you're doing this last part right here, you wanna make sure that the threads to the shafts that are in here are not pushed up against the fork leg. You want to pull them out a little bit or pull them out a little bit. That way you can put your fluid in there because we're going to put 10 cc's of the Maxima plush fluid on both legs. So the first thing you gotta do is make sure you have enough room to get that hose in there so the fluid will go down in there and you have that little bath inside. So that's what we're going to do right now. So I have my 20 cc's of fluid in here and we're going to do 10 and 10. So let's do it. Like I said, you got to make sure you have room in there to get that hose in there so it can go down. So now we're going to do our first 10 cc's. So there's 10 right there, almost. There we go, 10. And now we're going to do the other leg as well, and 10 for you. So now we have our fluid in there on both legs. And now what we're going to do is get our bolts started on both of these, and then we're going to torque them down. Another thing too, we have to push the legs down so that the threads will touch inside so we can get them started because the threads are on the shafts in there. So there we go. There's one. Here's number 2. All right, so both sides require 5 Newton meters torque on both bolts. So that's what we're going to do next. There we go. 5 Newton meters on one side and now the other side. There we go, both sides. All right, now we got to install our rebound knob. So the rebound knob right here is kind of tricky because you need to put 2.5 Newton meters on there. What I find that I do is I just kind of snug it because it's not something that actually is like holding something together. It's just kind of fail safe to hold the knob on. So what I do is I just find it, get it in there. As soon as it like starts to touch, I just kind of do it snug and leave it alone after that, and that tends to work pretty well for me. So what I usually do is I just kind of hold it down to make sure it's in there all the way, and then I tighten it until it stops, and then I give it just a little snug, and that seems to do the trick. Test it, it turns, so we're good to go. So at this point we're pretty much done. The only thing we need to do is put a little bit of air into our fork and we're good to go. So according to this fork, it says since I weigh between 160 and 180 pounds, I should have 80 to 90 PSI. So I like my suspension a little bit stiffer, so I'm gonna go ahead and go with the 90 PSI. All right, well that's how you change the travel on your RockShox Pike fork. If this video was helpful, go ahead and leave a comment down below and let me know if there's any other forks or any other things you'd like for us to do here on the channel. And that's it for today. So if you like what we do, hit that like button. If you want to see what we're up to next, hit that subscribe button. Always remember, start small and go huge. Thanks for watching.